This is the InfoMed Consulting Podcast, a show where we have engaging conversations with individuals in the medical technology industry. Sit back and enjoy.
Oliver, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the InfoMed Talks. That's the official name that I came up with it literally like a week ago, and I thought I would try it out today. So welcome. It's great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Cool. Yeah, great to be here. Pretty good. It's a pretty standard day, like the past, 700 days of my life where I've been sitting at home and working. but yeah, things are going well. I can't complain. So everything's going well.
Yeah, hopefully this will spice up your repetitive 700 days, and this will add a
For
bit
sure.
more of.
I'll be looking back to this and thinking the 701st day it changed everything.
Yeah, it's always the 701th day, and
Right.
for people that don't know you, I mean, I also relatively don't know you that well. I mean, we've spoken like 2 or 3 times, or once or twice.
Right.
Can you just maybe introduce yourself? Give us a short story of Oliver.
Sure. So I'm a trained medical doctor. I studied medicine here in Germany. I also grew up here in Germany, and I was always like very interested in computers, but that kind of stopped when I went to medical school and wanted to do something serious because I initially went to medical school because I wanted to help people, and I worked in a hospital shortly before that, and I thought it was kind of cool that you had this like activity where a patient comes in and is sick in some sense, and you kind of do something and the person walks out healthy, well, in the best case scenario. And it felt like a very rewarding thing and purposeful thing to do. And I kind of thought, well, I'm this huge nerd interested in computers, but I don't really see a lot of purpose in sitting behind computers for the rest of my life. So I should study something kind of like with more purpose. And so I ended up studying medicine, did that, stopped sitting in front of computers and just studied medicine. And then towards the end of my studies, I actually noticed, well, this whole computer thing is actually like really fun. I got into research and did my doctorate thesis. So I did radiology research, which was essentially getting 3D images of brain tumor patients, like MRI images, and like writing cool software which would like find new stuff in these images, hopefully predicting where the tumor, for example, is going to grow, which I thought was really, really exciting. And I started writing this code and self-teaching myself more stuff again. And I was like, I've never had this much fun in my entire like 5 years of med school. This is like awesome. And then also like there's all this data in this hospital lying around and no one's doing
Yeah,
anything with it because
yeah,
the IT guys, they're like lost in their IT world and want to like write great code which performs well, but they have no idea what the actual application is, like helping patients. And the doctors on the other side, they are unfortunately often not these logically minded, like physics, maths kind of people who like to write code. So it was just kind of me, at least in my understanding. And I thought, wow, this is super exciting. So I wanted to get into medical software. But it's actually very hard to get into medical software as a medical doctor, which sounds very counterintuitive. But my approach was I wanted to become a software developer. So I self-taught myself software developing on the side. A bit more, joined Vara, which is a Berlin-based startup, which still exists today. So that was already like in 2017 when I joined as one of the first, people that actually developed the first software, built up a team of really cool software engineers, like I think 5 people or so, built up a team of regulatory people, did the medical device certification at the time, and then left after like 2 or 3 years because I wanted to have my own company. And
Wait, hold on.
that's
It seems like a very interesting journey, because my understanding is that you're actually involved more in software or medical device software development, right? So you're essentially a software developer, I guess. And it seems like a very difficult route, going through med school first, only to become a software developer. Did you
yeah.
end up practicing medicine at some point, or have
So
you?
technically no, because in
Yeah.
Germany if you study medicine, you actually work for 1 year as part of those studies.
Yes.
That's kind of like your internship. It's like a bit watered down. You don't really have a whole lot of responsibility towards patients and everything, but you do like work full days at the hospital. So that's what I did, but I didn't really work, let's say, as a real, well, in Germany it's called like assistant doctor, like working real crazy shifts in the hospital with crazy responsibility. I never really did that, so I didn't end up doing that.
Did you look back at some point and you were like, I mean, I studied, because you studied what, 5 years medicine, and then
6 years, yeah.
6 years, and then did you ever look back or think now, look back now and say, maybe I shouldn't have studied medicine? Or is there still a benefit of going through? Because most people that study medicine, they really work super, super hard, and then when they become doctors, they finally like, okay, finally I can work now. But you kind of went, I don't want to do this anymore. I'll go into software.
Yeah.
Was there like some regret at some point, or some
No,
I should have done? Okay.
No, I would study medicine anytime again. It was an awesome time. And I mean, like it's just a great thing to study. It's so interesting.
Really,
the people there are actually really, really nice. I got along really well with almost everyone in my semester at university, and you meet really nice people. You have lots of parties, especially in Heidelberg, which is this rather small German student town. It's awesome. Like I would do it again anytime. Like, and I think like maybe another angle to come at this is there are certain jobs which you can do without having to study for those. For example, I can become a software engineer by self-teaching myself. I'm obviously a regulatory consultant by self-teaching myself, but I cannot practice as a doctor by self-teaching myself. I need to go through studies because it's a legal requirement. And in that sense, I think it's actually cool to have gone through med school because it gives you the opportunity to work as a doctor, even though you might not want to. But it kind of like adds like one more option to your spectrum of options. That's one thing. And for me, and this might be controversial, but I think for me, what you study is already nowadays very decoupled from what you actually end up doing. Like,
yeah, absolutely. That's not even controversial. I'll say it's almost except if you do like law or accounting or things that are very like hands-on. For example, engineering is very decoupled from the industry versus what you study. So I don't think that's controversial at all.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
sure.
right?
True. Yeah. And I think but I think that's a really powerful thought, right? Because like if it's decoupled what you study from what you do, you might as well study something which is super interesting for you personally, which has like a great bunch of students, and which is just a really cool time to have, right? And for me, medicine really checks all of those boxes. I think, sure, you have the stereotype that studying medicine is hard. I kind of don't agree with that. I just think you need to be organized and show up in the library kind of often and read books, but it's not hard. Like, for example, physics or maths would be hard that you really need to like put in the brain work. You just need to put in the hours. Yeah.
Okay, I'm pretty sure some med school students that are like in their 4th or 5th year will highly disagree with you. But I think I get what you're saying. It's more about like time management, right? And being able to take all this information and making sense. Well, not even making sense of it usually, because you kind of don't have to solve problems. It seems like, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to offend anyone.
No, it's very true. Like you kind of just need to know, well, what's the subject you're studying, what's the level of knowledge you need for your exam, and then you kind of like have this stack of books, and you like read 50 pages a day, and then you estimate when you're done, and then just do it. And you need to retain a lot of that information and do a lot of like multiple choice tests, but that's what medicine is about. Well, unfortunately, I guess that's what studying medicine is about.
Luckily, we're not here to convince people what to study, but if we were, they would probably not be convinced to study medicine after like these first few minutes. And just to move on, like, so the reason I wanted to talk to you, even like the first time we spoke, I think it was after you organized the OpenRegulatory conference. Mm-hmm. Was it last year? End of last year, I think.
Yeah, I think it was end of last year, yeah.
And then I saw you guys were having this thing, and I was like, the name already sounds pretty cool, right? Like OpenRegulatory. Like what?
Mhm.
Before we go into too much detail, like can you maybe just say like what OpenRegulatory is, and just the idea of that name, right?
Sure. So, I mean, what it is nowadays, it's very interesting. It's nowadays we're a consultancy and helping startups bring their medical devices to market. Um, what it started out as was actually way more interesting because I kind of left my job. I wasn't really unhappy. I mean, I wasn't unhappy with the company. I was unhappy with my own personal situation because I wanted to have like more freedom to determine how I would work, which I only think would be solvable by becoming self-employed. I didn't really know what to do yet, so I just like drifted into regulatory consulting as a freelancer. So I did like some regulatory consulting for some companies. It was successful.
Why
They really liked
why
me.
regulatory? Why regulatory consult? You could have
Um,
drifted into, I don't know, like clinical evaluation, especially with
yeah,
your medical background. Let's say
yeah.
why regulatory?
So I didn't really choose. It sounds very cliche. I didn't choose
Okay,
it. It chose
yeah.
me. No, because so like in all honesty, it's so I wasn't looking for anything when I became unemployed essentially, but two companies reached out to me and were like, "Well, we want to bring software as a medical device to market. Can you help us as a consultant?" Blah blah. And I was like, I don't really know. And they were like, but we really want you to help us. And I was like, okay, I'll register this one person business and I'll see what I can do. And
Oh
that's how it
wow,
started.
okay.
So they just like approached me.
Okay, and since then, so you said that open regulatory is not what it used to be. What did it start out as? Like, what was your initial
Exactly.
vision?
Yeah. Then
Yeah.
I did regulatory consulting and I generally thought it's like okay, it pays the bills. I think it's the actual activity is tremendously boring. I'm helping I am helping startups because the other consultants are just so bad. And that's not in a personal sense. They're like maybe slightly older people, slightly people who don't understand software, where you just have this huge mismatch that they have no idea of how to convey information to the startups because the startup software
Hmm.
developer would be like, what do I need to do in GitHub? And they would be like, what's GitHub? And so that would be like a huge problem. Um, and I kind of thought, okay, I'm helping startups here, but I want to get out of regulatory consulting because it's just too boring and mind numbing. I want to get back into software development because that's fun. And then I thought, okay, but I don't want to leave this field. I have so much knowledge. I don't want to leave it and
Hmm.
leave it in the state in which it is right now. So I thought, okay, I built this website, OpenRegulatory, where I just publish all of my knowledge in like simple, readable English articles and then I move on. Like once I've like dumped all my brain into that, I can say, well, I'm out of regulatory consulting. Check out my website. Here's my brain essentially, and go look for another consultant. So that's how it started out.
Okay. And what would you have done after that? Like, what was your idea, or did you not really think about, you know?
There was no idea. I mean, I was developing another. I actually launched another business on the side, which completely failed. So I built this recruiting software. So if you know these
Okay.
common recruiting platforms like Lever.co,
Yeah. Yeah.
Workable, I think, join.com, all of those things. I built like a competitor to that, and I like started marketing it, and it got zero users. I mean, it got a couple of users. It got zero paying customers, and it was by all measures probably a failure. But I kind of thought
Yeah.
I built this cool like SaaS software, and it's going to like take off and provide me with endless streams of money, and that didn't work out. But that was the alternative at the time. Yeah,
Okay. I mean, it's interesting how these things work out, right? Because eventually you ended up back at Open Regulatory. You know, is this because so you have this idea you're going to dump all your knowledge, and did you find that people were actually interested and people were approaching you? Is that kind of what happened?
for sure. Yeah. So the interesting thing was my first few customers were very happy and they started referring me to other customers. And I thought, well, okay, that's probably to be expected, but that's not always something I can count on because I can't really control it. I can't control how many
Yeah.
people are like referring me and whether those will approach me. But the interesting thing that happened was when I published more on Open Regulatory was that random people from the internet would start contacting me and becoming my customers, which was really exciting. So that meant my articles on openregulatory.com somehow got listed on Google and got found via Google. And people found those articles and actually trusted me that much to contact me and become my customer, which for me was a very interesting thing, because from a typical startup perspective, it kind of like proves, I guess, your business model or whatever. It proves that you can acquire customers without needing personal referrals. And I thought that was exciting.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, I love the name OpenRegulatory, because it's really powerful, especially because regulatory. Well, I agree. It does get a bit boring and mind numbing, and also it's very like open to interpretation, and so it means that when people have some regulatory information that they know works through the process, they're not usually very open to sharing it, right? Like there's this sort of like hoarding to information.
Exactly. Yeah.
And is this something that you experienced as well when you were
For
working?
sure. Yeah. That's the very sad like state of this industry, in my opinion, is everyone's disincentivized from sharing information, right? Like a startup which goes through regulatory certification, they're certainly disincentivized because they're like, okay, this was hell. We're not sharing anything and making lives easier for our competitors. And consultants would also be like, well, this provides me a steady source of income. If I share stuff, well, maybe it might not provide me a steady source of income anymore. And who else is there really? I mean, like then
So
you have like
you wanted to basically break the market, like, and just make everything
for
free,
sure.
and then
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like
why?
my
What
unofficial
inspired
goal.
that?
I think like for me, the inspiration was like as a medical student, I could like sit down in my tiny flat and I could like go visit the internet and teach myself coding, and I thought that was so exciting. Like there are all these
And it's
free
powerful
resources.
also, right? It's powerful as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's just me. I just need myself. I need time. I guess I need some motivation to go through courses or whatever and solve problems. But then it's kind of up to me. And I thought that was super powerful, and it enables this huge amounts of innovation where like a random person in a developing country with a capable computer and internet can do that. Now, I kind of came to regulation in my past company, and I was like, this is definitely not what the state of regulation is right now. So it's like you need to pay these consultants, and they give you this information in a very crappy format. They give you like crappy word templates and bad explanations and expensive workshops, just so you reach the same level of information which you reached as a coder for free. And I kind of thought, well, if you want to, like, the question is like, do I want to benefit personally from this? Then I would, of course, only do consulting as a freelancer. Or do I want this industry as a whole to become more innovative and actually ship more products, which will hopefully lead to shipping better products as part of that? Then yes, then I need to kind of somehow contribute to solving this problem that regulatory information is not freely available.
Okay, I can see a lot of people, especially those that have already been working, see this as almost as a threat, but also as almost like a bad thing happening to the industry. So I'm sure you must have gotten some resistance and maybe some calls from other consultants that weren't so happy.
Yeah.
You know, did you get that?
I think that actually really two answers to this, which I think are both interesting. Like the first one is yes, I definitely actually got like some semi-angry messages from consultants on LinkedIn. I sometimes still get them, which is like, and they're like these like slightly hidden threats. They're like, okay, they're like sending me advice, and one of that advice is like, oh, and by the way, if you get sued, you should probably found a limited liability company so it doesn't like so they don't get your personal assets. And I'm like, thank you for this advice, thank you very much. But apart from that, I probably receive less negativity than you would expect, and I think so that's my first point. My second point is also that I think this is incredibly short-sighted, because like if we make more information freely available, that will mean that the amount of startups which can enter the market probably increases, because more startups can enter the market, because startups with less funding can enter the market.
Yeah, exactly.
Startups with less funding can enter the market, and even startups which treat like more like niche diseases which were maybe not worthwhile to treat in the past, they can also enter the market. So probably the market actually suddenly becomes bigger, and maybe even the amount of consulting required may, in the short to midterm, maybe increase. But I think this sort of perspective is not really shared by other consultants. Not often,
because
maybe.
isn't it because, I mean, we're both consultants. So, for example, and I agree with your approach, by the way, I fully agree with it. But I think what some people would think is, okay, you're making all this information available, all these templates, whatever, all these resources. What role does the consultant then take if you're kind of giving that info, right? Like, what role do you envision the consultant taking?
For sure. Yeah. I think like in the very far future, in my best case scenario, you will only need consultants to answer like super special, complicated questions. Like everything else should be solvable without consultants. For example, I don't know, I cannot come up with a great example. Like, I mean, like the typical stuff, like what class is my software medical device if it has these random, super highly complex features and some machine learning in it, then like, okay, probably you might need a consultant to figure that out. But all other stuff, which is like so simple, like how to set up a QMS, how to do your technical documentation, blah, 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 how to like document whatever, Google Cloud as part of a medical device. That's like solvable by just sharing information for free.
Yeah. I think what happens also is that small companies, when they start, right, they look at how they can maximize their budget. And usually they'll try to do all these things by themselves. And then they'll try to go through the regulatory activities by themselves. And then they realize they don't have the knowledge, and they've wasted maybe 2 years doing it by themselves, only to end up getting a consultant again. So you've lost time and money in a sense, right? Mm-hmm. So should it be a case where if that information was available, then they would have been able to do it correctly the first time? Is that kind of
sure? That would be great if that would be really great if that's one of the effects. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's unfortunately regulatory is always seen as a cost point and never a profit point. So whenever there's no money, the first thing that gets affected is that. And at the same time, I think consultants are actually really because I mean, let me give an example, right? So when I started, I had this idea of, I'm gonna make a few templates that I know are useful. I'm gonna put them online, and then someone advised me strongly against it because they were saying, well, no, this is actually our work. Like, what are you doing? And I said, well, I kind of get what you're coming from, but at the same time, it's exactly what we're saying, right? How do we, like, what is our purpose? Do we want to make a better market, or do we want to make more money? As bad as it sounds, right? Because I mean, I want to make money, you want to make money, but in the long term, there's got to be a bigger vision, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I totally agree with you. And I think like, I still think the analogy with open source software is really, really cool because I don't know, like 10 or 20 years ago when there wasn't any GitHub, when there was like SourceForge, like this like slightly crappy website to host your code. I don't think people at that stage could really like predict what would happen if you like publish more software as open source software. But I think what we can understand is, does it feel right? Like, does it feel right to, for example, code a cool software package and publish it for free if other people can use it? Probably it felt pretty right to the people at the time. And you kind of see all these second order effects which happen 10 or 20 years down the road. You have like, I don't know, crazy machine learning software and cool open source packages where everyone can kind of build something really nice. And the total amount of software developers required has really increased. Like software developing is a huge profession nowadays. So I think like your thought is really good here, like in the sense of like, sometimes it makes sense to just do what feels right, because like often the second and third order consequences are hard to predict, but they generally will be favorable, I think, if you act in that way.
And I recently spoke with a guy called Monir Elazouzi. He's a consultant based out in Switzerland, and he runs Easy Medical Device. I don't know if you've maybe heard of them. And he told me, for example, like he'll make stuff available online on his platform, these templates, for example, but then he charges for them. And the reason for that is because it's something that takes maybe, 100 hours of preparation. What's your opinion on that kind of information sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really criticize it. I mean, to me, it's also fine. Like everyone should make their business decisions how they kind of think is for what they think is the right decision. And I don't think there's an objectively right or wrong way of charging for templates or not. I think like for me, and I see his point, and I think his point is also shared by many other consultants, where they kind of say like, yes, I spent a whole lot of time and resources on building these templates. That's why I want to sell them. I don't want to give them away for free. And I can totally understand that. I think one of my thoughts also just was like, I mean, firstly, I wasn't super interested in selling templates because I thought I can earn money in another way. And if I really want to help, like, not just 5 startups per year, but like, say, 500 startups per year who visit our website, then I have to share them for free. The second thing which I thought about was in my startup experience. So at my past company at Vara, we worked with another consultant and we also purchased their templates, which was really cool, and it also worked out great. It's not a problem. But what I actually saw then working not at my time at the time there, when I talked to people from other startups, there was kind of like this secret exchange of consultant templates in between startups. So without paying for them, of course. So the interesting thing
Right.
was, as soon as you sell templates to a startup, you actually have to assume that they kind of like diffuse into other startups and get sent around. And that will always happen with this sort of stuff. So then I thought, well, do I want to be a part of this? Or do I just kind of like accept that fact and share them for free?
Oh, I see what you mean. And then it becomes a matter of doing what feels right, like you said, instead of doing what everyone else is doing or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for me personally, again, I'm not criticizing the decisions of other consultants. For me personally, it was like, does it feel right to sell these like Word files or like these poorly formatted, I don't know, other file format files, templates, spreadsheets? Does that kind of feel right that people pay a couple €1,000 for like a zip folder with Word files in it? And to me personally, that didn't feel right. I thought like, I, as a person, I maybe would pay like a couple €100 for that, maybe not even, and still, then it would feel a bit weird. It would feel like, by the way, like these super shady websites where you buy this PDF for $50, which tells you how to lose weight or so, or how to get back with your ex-girlfriend. Like I kind of, on a certain level, I love those websites, and but those also never really felt right, because it's like I pay €50 for like a PDF, like somehow I don't know, it just didn't feel right. Yeah.
Of course, my assumption would be that that's not the main business of these types of companies, right?
Sure.
That they're not just trying to push templates around. Because, I mean, it is, like you said, the moment and I mean, I'm pretty sure many of us have done it, you pay for something and then, or someone pays for something and then it's shared around and you end up using templates that you didn't even know someone paid for. You're just using it because it's being circulated, as you said, sort of in the, like, under the table between startups.
Yeah.
And it defeats the whole purpose at the end.
Yeah.
So with all that you're saying, right, how do you envision the MDR being put into the market effectively? Because again, here it's also a case of there's this really complex regulation. We can talk about whether it's fair or unfair, but it's here, right? So we have no choice but to deal with it, I guess. But at the same time, I think people are paying crazy amounts of money to get to the market and to go through the notified body. And a lot of the times people don't know what to do and how to interpret the regulations. So is there a need from your side to also have the open approach when it comes to something as big as the MDR?
For sure, definitely, yeah. And I think I mean, like every consultant says that, but the MDR is a huge fiasco because it, like, regardless of fair, unfair, everything, it's just more complex, right? So it just makes it much harder to be compliant because there are more requirements and they're more complex. Like that's the very strong simplification. And I think we definitely need a more open approach there. And I think there's like really there's so much cool stuff you could do. For example, like I had this idea, unfortunately we never executed yet, of like having, for example, an open source medical device where you kind of say like, cool, this software is on the market as a medical device, and software as a medical device. But the entire source code is open source, and even the technical file and the quality management system of the company is open source. So literally everything's open source. And I think that would be really cool if that would be also a class 2A or higher product, because then it would go through a notified body approval. And now you could kind of say like, now another company could say like, hey, we take this open source medical device and make, let's say, minor changes to it and go to another notified body. And that notified body is in a very now interesting position, because if they don't want to approve this, they will need very good reasoning, because you can literally say, well, that's the documentation which got approved by this other notified body with minor changes. And I think it would be such a great initiative.
Yeah. Wouldn't the issue, and I'm not trying to shut down your idea, right? I'm just taking the other side of the argument.
You can also shoot it down.
No, I actually think it's a brilliant idea to have this open source, almost like a template, right, for people to be able to build on and change and stuff. But isn't the issue that every new application is seen as a new application? So there's not really like this equivalence type of thing. Well, if there is, then you have to show that it's exactly the same and not, so how wouldn't the notified body still tell you, for example, well, you still need to give clinical data for this specific one, although it's the same as
exactly
as that one.
I think that definitely. I mean, my reasoning would be very informal. Like, you wouldn't really use this as an equivalent device. For example, you wouldn't say like, hey, this is an equivalent device in my clinical evaluation, but instead you would actually say, look, this open source device passed the notified body, I don't know, TÜV or whatever, and then and you can literally point to the changes. Like, our device only differs in these two areas. So if you kind of have a problem with our device, like bringing it to market, and certainly a new device, like legally, but if now this notified body has a problem bringing our device to market, it can actually only point to these two changes, because the other device got approved without those two changes. So I think that would be the powerful part of it.
But okay, there's another thing, right? Because again, doesn't the notified body look at this as if all the other devices didn't exist? So it wouldn't know
for sure
that the open source one exists. But it does present an interesting conundrum.
I mean, exactly. Right now,
because now this thing is open source.
That's exactly that's the state in which we're right now, right? Every notified body looks at each device and kind of like pretends this is a new device, and they haven't seen any other device.
Which is a bit
kind of right.
It is a bit like silly in a sense, because surely, like in our example, if all the information is already out there for open source device, if I'm an auditor at a notified body, I might want to look at that just to it seems weird that it almost seems like they're creating more work for themselves. If for each new device, although there could be 500 of the same type of device, they will still treat this as a completely new. That seems like super weird to me.
For sure. It's such a good point. And I think it's so interesting, because this makes the system so inefficient. Like, if a notified body, notified bodies right now, they kind of say like, hey, we need, I don't know, a couple of weeks to review your technical file. And then I would be like, well, yes, with the current processes, you need a couple of weeks, because everyone hands in their custom formatted PDFs, which is a huge mess generally, and it would like exported from some tool, and then you have like a person who has to manually like sift through these PDFs. Of course, that's going to take a couple of weeks. But if there would be like a more structured approach, where you say like, maybe there's like a device on the market, but the same notified body approved by them, and you only show like, hey, our device actually only differs in these few things, you could approve it in like an hour. Like, in theory, of course, right? If you would reduce the work, that would be like,
that would be
a really smart approach. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's not the road we're going down right now. I mean, right now it's like towards like, oh my God, we need more notified bodies. We need more auditors in the notified bodies. And that's only going to add like very incremental capacity. And I think that'll be very hard.
Because, I mean, if you think about things like machine learning and AI, for example, right, where if you use the current process of certifying devices, like you can only have so many auditors to look at all the data that's needed for AI and
Right.
machine learning, for example, right? So
Yeah.
it's almost getting to a point where the notified bodies will have to implement some sort of AI themselves in order to be able to
Yeah.
assess the AI that, because how do
Yeah.
you assess AI without having software for it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true, and I think it's a huge problem. I think, and you could even take this problem one level higher and say like, well, software. It's not just AI software or machine learning software. It's
Hmm.
software in general. Like software in general is
Yeah.
becoming very very complex, and now if I ask myself, how many really smart software people do I know who would love to work at a notified body? That number is kind of zero. And unfortunately, because like they would prefer
Yeah.
to work at Google because I don't know stuff's interesting there. So, and I think that's
Hmm.
very, very dangerous because that means you don't really have an incentivation for smart software people to work in notified bodies. So you will have some, let's just say, maybe less smart software people,
Yeah.
and they should now wade through this documentation of a complex software system. And I think that's probably just not a good setup, which is going to work well.
Yeah. As someone who's inclined towards software and medical device software, have you had any ideas of building tools that would make the documentation process a lot easier, for example, right? Like using some
Yeah.
sort of natural language processing or whatever. Like, do you think of things like that?
So yeah, definitely. And I think it's so interesting because the open source software analogy, it works really well here because now as a software developer, I can teach myself software developing easily. Well, not easily, but freely with online resources. Now, what are the tools which I will now use on a day-to-day basis? And those are like development tools, and those are like deployment tools, like cloud providers like AWS or so. Those are tools which really help me build my product and ship it. And that's pretty much the same what we're also doing. Like we're developing regulatory software, which helps me kind of like build my product and ship it. Well, at least build the regulatory documentation and ship that. So we are not really building like AI stuff because I think the low hanging fruit here is can be really solved with like simple software engineering, and it's
Okay,
really
yeah, fair
simple
enough.
stuff
Yeah,
like create a list of software requirements with nice forms, auto generate traceability matrices, automatically send like training documentation or training material to employees, and then you have automatic like documentation of training and proof for that. So I think a lot of that can really and actually is automated by our software, and that's really really exciting.
okay. So you're building like almost like a EQMS software type of thing.
Exactly, yeah, it's like an EQMS except that it doesn't suck like the other EQMSs out there.
That is a very strong claim. A lot of people, I'm not going to mention the companies and anything like that, but a lot of people would be like, "This guy's crazy." What makes in your opinion, like what would make your EQMS not suck as much as the other ones? Is it free?
It's just
Is it
like
is it fully free?
no,
Because
it's
that's usually that's
it's
usually a pain
no,
point with.
no, it's not free, but the pricing is actually extremely transparent. It's like a flat fee for unlimited team members, which is pretty insane because
Really?
usually
Okay.
EQMS providers charge for each seat, and we actually charge only, well, only in quotation marks, 499 euros per month for unlimited team members. So, well, nearly 500 euros per month, and which typically is cheaper than any other
Wait,
EQMS out there.
500 euros? Oh, for unlimited seats.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And other than price,
Um,
because I guess some companies
and
price is not an issue, right? They need
Yeah,
something
exactly.
more
And
than.
yeah, and besides that, like I think it's just like it's just intuitive, and I wouldn't say it's fun to use. No EQMS software is fun to use. Like that's just not possible. But it like it doesn't get in your way, which I think other software really does. Like if, for example, if you want to create a new document, there's a huge button which says create new document, and then you like hit that button. You like write the document, and then there's like a text at the top which says like, hey, you created the document. By the way, it's a draft. and you should probably send it out for review because that makes it an approved document. And then you would be like, cool, like you click like on send it out for review, select some reviewers, and you send it out.
Yeah.
And it's all like extremely intuitive. It's not like,
Right.
and other
There's no
software
like
is often
huge learning curve, right? There's no.
exactly, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
For example, I think like a good analogy is also Basecamp, the project management system, which I'm very fond of, also the company behind it. And they say they build opinionated software in the sense of the software is probably not going to work for many people out there, but for some other people, it's going to work extremely well because they've baked their own opinions of how this software should work and how processes with it should work into that software. And that's the same what we did. Like you have to, there's no way of customizing our software a lot. Like a document is created, it's a draft, you send it out for review to certain people, and that's just the way it is. You can't change that workflow. So I think, and that's
Yeah.
also, I think, the biggest strength of it, because it's an obvious way of how to use it. You just can't get it wrong. And I think that's really, really, really needed in this area.
Yeah, that would be I'd be very interested to see how it evolves. To be honest, it sounds.
Sure.
I mean, I'm always intrigued by simple solutions, right? Because sometimes I guess we maybe overcomplicate things, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to regulatory processes and quality assurance processes. But it could be very simple. I'm very curious to know how do you see the market like in the next 2 years with the MDR, coming into play, and a lot of people are not having the best time. A lot of people are leaving the market. What's your prediction for like the next, let's say, 2 years? Because that's kind of at that point, there shouldn't be any MDD devices, right? So,
Right.
how do you see the the medical device market in Europe in about 2 years?
It's a really, really good question. I mean, I think there's some obvious facts which can be observed, which are clearly it's become much more expensive to bring a medical device to market, and it's become much more like difficult in the sense of like time and uncertainty. Especially like, for example, nowadays everyone's wondering whether they need a clinical trial for their clinical evaluation, because the whole like equivalence situation is not really working out anymore under MDR. And like I actually don't have answers to that, but there's a lot of uncertainty. So what will happen, in my opinion, is a lot of small manufacturers might not like keep their products on the market because they just can't. They don't have the budget and the time resources for doing this anymore, and to pretty much maybe even end up with like a thing like with airplane manufacturers. You just maybe have a huge, like in the worst case, you have a few huge companies who have the resources for all this regulatory overhead, like building stuff, and all the others kind of disappear because you probably can't have like a 3-person startup, like a bootstrap 3-person startup, doing stuff like in an MDR compliant way with like notified body fees and everything. I think that's probably going to be very, very tricky. And if we don't kind of like counteract that in some way, those companies might be going away.
Yeah, they can always come to South Africa. Apparently, there's a market here, so they
Interesting.
can. Yeah, it's in a sense it's a bit scary because we almost don't want to admit that this could go really bad. At the same time, I mean, there's a bit of hope because we also know that the process it's not useless, right? I don't think they made the regulation to make people's lives more difficult. I think they really tried to make the market a lot better, right? To end up with better products in the market. And I think the thing that's missing is there wasn't enough education, there wasn't enough training from the people that wrote the regulations. So I think with the open regulatory model, of sharing not just templates, right? I think people shouldn't think we're only talking about sharing templates, but just sharing methods and sharing definitions of things and processes and that kind of thing. Because at this point, there's what will make you successful is whether you have the right information, right? And that's basically, unfortunately, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah,
it seems like.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not as positive as you with what the market will be in the next 2 years, except if there's some big changes. Because um, I saw something about the some company or like a forum or whatever. They were, I don't know if they have a petition to push the MDR by another 2 years, um, and maybe it'll come down to that, or push it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's already here, but just have the transitional period be extended to
hmm
be extended by 2 years. I think we might end up with something like that, unfortunately.
Maybe, yeah, yeah. I mean, that would probably be helpful. I guess it would only like postpone the problem for in two
Yeah,
years.
yeah, that's the problem.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's a huge problem, and I think I'm not like it's. I think it's very easy to point at regulators and kind of say like, yeah, they're super evil. They did this bad thing to us. But I think it's just like, and this may actually sound mean again, but it's a bit like a GDPR situation. It's like probably the intent behind the regulation started out to be good. Like it was like, well, we should probably regulate this, have an like EU-wide regulation for this, and everything should be the same, and everything's great. But then I think GDPR started out in a similar way. But what we nowadays have is GDPR and every website displaying annoying cookie banners, which we never really expected to see. And now everyone's like busy clicking away these cookie banners and just
yeah,
super annoyed, and they completely forgot about GDPR, what the benefits actually were and what the intent was. And I think with
yeah.
the MDR, it's maybe the same. Like he actually had these maybe good intentions, and somehow along the way, you ended up with an implementation where everyone's struggling nowadays.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Oliver, where can we find you? Like, if people want to maybe partner with you, or they're interested in your QMS that's better than anyone else's, or
Right.
they just want to see the all the resources that you have. How do we reach you? What do you do exactly? Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as mentioned, you can just head over to openregulatory.com. That's open and regulatory in one word, .com. And if you kind of click enough pages at some stage and you scroll down, there's like the contact me button somewhere, or there's even like the schedule a call button where you can directly schedule
yeah,
a call with me on my calendar. That's probably like the best way to reach me.
yeah. And then someone asked me to ask you. Are you going to do
Wow.
another Open Regulatory conference? And will you let Hervé Mwamba speak at the conference when you have the next one?
Good question. We actually don't know if we're doing another conference right now.
Oh, you
Probably
should.
will descend by end of the year. But
Yeah, yeah.
and
You
I
definitely
mean,
should.
you're definitely like very invited to hold the talk. I think it would be really really interesting. Also for the others, also to hear like this whole South African perspective you have. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'll let you know if we end up doing it.
yeah. No, for sure. I was just joking about the second part. But yeah, no. As soon
Well,
as
I wasn't.
I was joking. I'm actually mad at you guys for. Actually, I didn't come to the previous one. I ended up not being
Hmm.
able to because of I think I probably had some work that came in at the last minute or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but
Yeah, well, no
this
worries. I
was
mean, you should attend
yeah
the next one when it happens then.
no. Let it set it up and we will be there. Oliver,
Sounds
this
great.
this is always cool talking to you. Like you're very like you seem like someone very chilled. Like you kind of do the work and you're very relaxed and I kind of like that approach because it means that you look at the way things are done, like in regulatory and quality, and you try to make it simple, and you give off that vibes. And I think we need more consultants that are not like very panicky and that
Yeah,
inspire a bit of calmness, because these things can be
for
very stressful
sure.
sometimes.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
mean,
really,
thanks, I appreciate it. And I hope that's the impression which I kind of make. But yeah,
yeah,
definitely. I mean, that would be really great. I think it's really important to sometimes like while you do something like kind of take a step back and think like, well, what did we actually want to achieve? Is there like a simpler way for this and everything? And certainly in regulation, I think those are the questions we should be asking.
yeah, yeah. No, for sure. And thanks for not becoming a doctor, because otherwise we wouldn't have had this conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
And yeah, let's do this again soon. It's always good talking to
cool.
you. And I really like your ideas, like especially the regulatory or the open source software model. That would be insanely cool. So if you ever decide
Yeah,
to start doing something like that, I'd love to hear more about it.
yeah, for sure. Definitely. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, otherwise, this has been great, and that's the story, ladies and gentlemen.
Cool. Great. I mean, thanks
Great.
for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging conversation. To find out more about InfoMed, visit infomed-consult.org. See you next time.